The village of Zubari was a land of wealth and tradition, ruled by the great chief Barasa. He was a man of strength and wisdom, known for leading his people with a firm yet just hand. His two wives, Adisa and Mirembe, lived under the same roof, but could not have been more different. Adisa, the first wife, had been with Chief Barasa for many years, but had never been able to bear him a child. Though she remained the elder wife, the pain of barrenness ate away at her pride, turning her once loving heart into one filled with bitterness. She longed for the day she would give her husband an heir, but fate had denied her that blessing. When Chief Barasa took a second wife, Mirembe, a gentle and kind woman, Adisa's resentment only deepened. Mirembe was everything Adisa was not: young, soft-spoken, and beloved by the people. Unlike Adisa, she had not let jealousy consume her heart. She had come to the chief's household with the hope of peace, never wishing harm upon anyone. But when she became pregnant, everything changed. The joy that filled Mirembe's days became Adisa's worst nightmare. When the time came for Mirembe to give birth, the entire village gathered to celebrate. The women sang songs of praise, the elders blessed the child, and the warriors of Zubari offered gifts to their chief. A daughter was born, Nasari, a baby with a radiant glow and eyes as bright as the morning sun. She was a symbol of prosperity and joy, a child destined for greatness. But while the village rejoiced, Adisa's heart boiled with hatred. She forced a smile and joined in the celebration, but inside, she burned with fury. How could this woman, this second wife, be so blessed when she, the first wife, had been cursed with an empty womb? She watched as Chief Barasa held his newborn daughter, his face full of pride and love, and she felt a deep stab of pain. In that moment, she made a vow: Nasari would not live to take her place. If she could not have a child, then Mirembe would not have one either. That night, as the village fell into a peaceful slumber, Adisa lay awake, her mind consumed with wicked thoughts. She had spent years waiting, hoping, praying for a child of her own, only to be humiliated by another woman's joy. No, she would not stand by and watch. She would take matters into her own hands. The night was dark and silent, with only the distant cries of wild animals echoing through the trees. The village of Zubari lay still, its people deep in slumber, unaware of the evil about to unfold. Chief Barasa had left for war days ago, taking his strongest warriors with him. Without him, the village felt emptier, more vulnerable. It was the perfect night for Adisa to carry out her wicked plan. Mirembe's hut was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of a dying lantern. Inside, the new mother lay fast asleep, exhausted from caring for her newborn. Baby Nasari rested peacefully beside her, wrapped in a soft cloth, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She had no idea of the danger lurking in the shadows. Adisa stood at the entrance, her heart pounding as she listened to Mirembe's steady breathing. She took slow, careful steps, her hands trembling with both fear and rage. For a brief moment, she hesitated. The child was so small, so innocent. But then the bitterness returned, the jealousy that had haunted her for years. This baby had stolen everything from her: her husband's love, her honor, her place in the household. She could not let her live. Reaching down, Adisa gently lifted the baby from her blanket. Nasari stirred slightly but did not wake. Holding the child close, Adisa whispered coldly, "You were never meant to be born." With swift, silent steps, she slipped out of the hut and disappeared into the night. She walked through the village, her heart hammering in her chest, but no one saw her. The villagers were fast asleep, unaware that their chief's daughter was being carried away by a woman filled with hatred. The journey to the Malanu River was long, but Adisa never stopped. The wind howled through the trees, and the river roared in the distance, its angry waves crashing against the rocks. When she reached the riverbank, she stood at the edge and looked down at the raging waters. This was where it would end. For a moment, she hesitated again. The baby was so light in her arms, so helpless. But then she thought of the years she had spent feeling worthless, the pain of watching Mirembe take everything she had ever wanted. No, there was no turning back. Taking a deep breath, Adisa held the baby over the water. The river's current was strong. It would take the child far away, leaving no trace. Without another thought, she let go. Nasari's tiny body disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the rushing water. Adisa stood there for a moment, her heart pounding, waiting for the guilt to come, but all she felt was relief. It was over. She turned and walked away, convinced that the river had washed away all traces of her crime. The Malanu River raged through the land, its strong currents swallowing everything in its path. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the trees, carrying the sound of rushing water far and wide. But beneath the storm's fury, a small, desperate cry echoed through the night, a sound too soft for most ears to catch. Baba Tembo, an old healer who lived near the river, was out searching for herbs. His back ached with age, but his hands were steady as he picked leaves and roots, muttering to himself about the medicines he would make. Just as he was about to return home, a strange sound reached his ears. He froze, listening. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it was there, the cry of a baby. His heart pounded. A child? Here, in the middle of the night? It made no sense. Clutching his walking staff, he hurried toward the river, his eyes scanning the dark waters. Then he saw it, a small basket caught between the roots of a tree, bobbing up and down in the current. Inside, wrapped in damp cloth, was a tiny infant, her face barely visible in the moonlight. Baba Tembo's breath caught in his throat. Who would abandon such a helpless child? He waded into the water, the cold biting at his skin, and carefully pulled the basket from the river's grasp. The baby let out another weak cry, her tiny fingers curling. She was alive. A miracle. The old healer held her close, feeling her warmth against his chest. He had spent years healing others, helping mothers bring life into the world, but he had never been blessed with a child of his own. Perhaps this was fate. Perhaps the river had not taken this child's life, because she was meant to find him instead. "You are safe now, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I will call you Ammani, for you have brought peace where there was almost sorrow." Back in Zubari, Mirembe awoke to a nightmare. She reached for her baby and found only an empty space beside her. Her hands searched wildly, her heart pounding with panic. Where was Nasari? She screamed for help, waking the entire village. People rushed to her hut, their torches casting long shadows, their voices filled with worry. Adisa was among them, her face painted with concern, though her heart remained cold. She held Mirembe's hands, pretending to share in her grief. "Oh, sister," she whispered. "Perhaps the gods have taken her. Perhaps it was meant to be." Mirembe collapsed in tears, her wails filling the night air. No one could explain what had happened. The child had simply vanished, as if swallowed by the darkness. But far away, safe in the arms of an old healer, the child who was meant to die had been given a second chance. Destiny had other plans for her, and her journey was only just beginning. Ammani grew up in the small, peaceful hut of Baba Tembo, surrounded by the vast green forest. The old healer cared for her like she was his own blood, teaching her everything he knew about herbs, medicine, and the spirits of the land. From a young age, Ammani watched as sick villagers traveled from faraway places, seeking Baba Tembo's wisdom. She listened as he spoke gently to them, his hands working with precision to mix healing roots and leaves. Under his care, she learned how to treat wounds, cure fevers, and even understand the whispers of nature. Though their life was simple, Ammani was happy. She spent her days gathering herbs, grinding powders, and learning the secrets of healing. But as she grew older, she began to feel something strange deep inside her, a longing she could not explain. Whenever she sat by the river, watching the water flow endlessly toward places she had never seen, a question would rise in her heart. Who am I? Where do I truly belong? She had always known that Baba Tembo was not her real father. He had told her the truth when she was still a child, explaining how he had found her in the river, a lost baby cradled by fate. He had named her Ammani, meaning peace, because she had come to him at a time when he had lost all hope of having a child. But no matter how much love he gave her, she couldn't shake the feeling that another life awaited her beyond the trees of their quiet home. Ammani was not like other village girls. Her skin glowed like the morning sun, and her eyes held a deep wisdom far beyond her years. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her mind and heart that made her truly special. She had a kindness that could soften even the hardest hearts, and a curiosity that made her eager to learn more than what Baba Tembo could teach. Sometimes, she would ask him about the world beyond the forest, about the great villages and the powerful rulers. He would tell her stories of chiefs, warriors, and queens, of lands where people lived in grand huts and walked with pride. With each story, her desire to leave grew stronger. She loved Baba Tembo, but she could not ignore the voice inside her that whispered, "You were meant for more." Late at night, when the stars shone brightly above the treetops, Ammani would sit outside their hut, looking at the sky and wondering if her real family was out there somewhere. She did not know that her true home, the village of Zubari, was not far away, nor did she know that her return would shake the foundations of everything she had ever known. One afternoon, while Baba Tembo was away gathering herbs, Ammani decided to clean their small hut. She carefully arranged the clay pots, wiped the wooden shelves, and swept the floor with a bundle of dried grass. As she worked, she noticed an old wooden chest tucked beneath Baba Tembo's sleeping mat. She had seen it before, but had never dared to open it. Curious, she knelt beside it and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she found neatly folded clothes, small carvings, and a few precious items that Baba Tembo had collected over the years. But one thing caught her eye: a small golden pendant resting on a soft piece of cloth. She picked it up and held it in her palm, studying its smooth surface. It was round, with strange markings carved into it, and it shimmered in the sunlight. Ammani felt a strange pull in her heart. She had never seen this pendant before, yet it felt familiar, as if it had always been a part of her. A deep sense of longing filled her chest, and for a moment she could hear the sound of water rushing around her. The river. Just then, Baba Tembo entered the hut and saw the pendant in her hands. He let out a heavy sigh and sat down beside her. "You were never meant to see this," he said softly, his eyes filled with sadness. Ammani turned to him, confusion in her gaze. "Whose is it?" she asked. Baba Tembo hesitated for a moment, then placed a gentle hand on hers. "It is yours, my child," he said. "It was around your neck the night I found you in the river." Ammani's heart pounded. "Then, I am not really your daughter." Baba Tembo smiled sadly. "You are my daughter by fate, not by blood. The river brought you to me when I had no one. I raised you, I loved you, and you will always be my child. But your true family is out there, waiting for you." Tears welled in Ammani's eyes. She had always felt different, always sensed that she belonged somewhere else. Now, she finally had proof. She stared at the pendant, wondering who had placed it around her neck, who had loved her before the river had stolen her away. She took a deep breath and looked at Baba Tembo with determination. "I need to find them," she said. "I need to know where I come from." Baba Tembo nodded, though his heart was heavy. He had always known this day would come. "Then go, my child," he said. "Follow your heart, but remember, no matter where you go, you will always have a home here." With the pendant clutched tightly in her hand, Ammani gathered her few belongings and prepared to leave the only home she had ever known. She did not know what awaited her in the world beyond the forest, but one thing was clear: her journey had begun. Ammani's journey to Zubari was long and tiring, but her heart was filled with hope. She had never seen the village before, yet as she stepped onto its dusty paths, something inside her stirred, as if she had walked these roads in another life. The village was lively, with children playing under the shade of large baobab trees, women pounding yam, and men returning from the fields with baskets of food. But as Ammani walked deeper into the village, silence began to spread like ripples in a still pond. One by one, the villagers turned to look at her. Whispers filled the air. People pointed, their eyes wide with shock. "She looks just like Chief Barasa," someone murmured. "She has his eyes," another said, staring at Ammani with disbelief. Ammani's heart pounded. She had never met Chief Barasa, but from the way people spoke, it was clear that her presence had shaken them. Could it be true? Could this man be her father? At that moment, Chief Barasa himself stepped out of his grand hut. He was older now, his hair streaked with grey, but he still carried the strength of a leader. His eyes, sharp and commanding, locked onto Ammani, and for a brief moment he seemed frozen. A strange feeling washed over him. There was something familiar about this young woman standing before him, something that pulled at his soul. "Who are you?" he asked, his deep voice filled with curiosity. Ammani hesitated, gripping the pendant around her neck. "My name is Ammani," she said. "I have come to find the truth about my past." The moment she spoke, Adisa, who had been watching from the shadows, felt a wave of fear crash over her. She had lived many years as the most powerful woman in the village, ensuring that no one ever questioned what had happened to Mirembe's lost child. But now, standing before her, was the one person who could destroy everything she had built. Her fingers clenched into fists, but she forced a smile onto her face. "Welcome to Zubari," she said sweetly. though her heart pounded with panic. She had to find a way to silence this girl before the truth came out, but it was too late. The whispers in the village were growing louder, and Chief Barasa could not shake the feeling that fate had just placed something precious back into his hands. Ammani's heart pounded as she walked through the village, searching for the woman who could hold the answers to her past. She asked a kind old woman where she could find Mirembe, and the woman pointed toward a small, quiet hut at the edge of the village. As Ammani approached, she saw a woman sitting outside, weaving a basket. Mirembe looked older than her years, her once beautiful face marked by sorrow. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, her eyes distant, lost in memories of the past. Ammani took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Are you Mirembe?" she asked gently. Mirembe looked up, startled. The moment her eyes met Ammani's, her breath caught in her throat. There was something strikingly familiar about this young woman. Her face, her eyes, the way she stood. Mirembe's heart began to race, but she pushed the thought away. It couldn't be. It was impossible. "I am Mirembe," she answered. "Who are you?" Without a word, Ammani reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled out the golden pendant. She held it up, letting the sunlight reflect off its smooth surface. Mirembe gasped. The basket in her hand slipped to the ground, forgotten. Her vision blurred with tears as she stepped closer, staring at the pendant, the very same one she had placed around her newborn daughter's neck all those years ago. Her lips trembled as she reached out, touching the pendant, as if to make sure it was real. Where did you get this?" she whispered. Ammani's voice was steady, but her heart ached with emotion. "I was found as a baby near the Malanu River. The man who raised me, Baba Tembo, said I was wearing this when he rescued me." Mirembe let out a sob, covering her mouth with both hands. Her knees grew weak, and she sank to the ground. "My daughter!" she choked out between sobs. "My daughter has returned!" The villagers gathered around, murmuring in shock. Some ran to fetch the elders, while others stared in disbelief. Could it really be? The lost child of Mirembe, the one who had vanished without a trace, was standing before them. The village elders arrived quickly, their faces serious. "What is the meaning of this?" one of them demanded. Mirembe wiped her tears and stood, her voice shaking but firm. "This is my daughter," she declared. "She was stolen from me as a newborn, and now she has come back home." The elders turned to Adisa, whose face had lost all color. She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "This is nonsense," she snapped. "How can you be sure? Anyone could have that pendant." Mirembe turned to Ammani and took her hands. "A mother knows her child," she said softly, "and my heart tells me this is her." The crowd murmured in agreement, but the elders were not satisfied. "There is only one way to know the truth," one of them said. "We must uncover what truly happened the night Mirembe's child disappeared." All eyes turned to Adisa. She swallowed hard, fear creeping into her chest. The secret she had buried for so many years was beginning to rise to the surface, and she knew there was no escaping it now. The village square was silent as all eyes turned to Adisa. The elders stood in a circle, their faces stern, waiting for her to speak. Mirembe, still holding Ammani's hands, stared at her with a mixture of pain and anger. Chief Barasa, his expression dark and unreadable, watched the woman he had once trusted. Adisa forced a smile, though her hands trembled. "This is all a mistake," she said quickly. "There is no proof that this girl is Mirembe's child. Anyone can claim to be someone they are not," the villagers murmured, but no one seemed convinced. The resemblance between Ammani and Chief Barasa was too strong. And the pendant. Everyone knew Mirembe had given it to her newborn before she vanished. One of the elders, an old man with deep wrinkles, took a step forward. "Adisa," he said in a grave voice, "years ago, you were the only one present when Mirembe's child disappeared. Tell us the truth now, or face the consequences." Adisa's heart pounded. She could feel the walls closing in around her. She started, but the words caught in her throat. Another elder, a woman known for her wisdom, narrowed her eyes. "You have been cruel to Mirembe for many years," she said. "Did you not hate the child for being born when you could not have children of your own?" "I never—" Adisa's voice cracked. "Enough lies!" Chief Barasa's deep voice cut through the air like thunder. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "I see it now. You were jealous. You wanted to be the only wife with power, and you saw the child as a threat. What did you do, Adisa?" Adisa opened her mouth, but no words came. She knew she was trapped. If she denied it, they would never believe her. If she confessed, her life in Zubari would be over. Finally, her strength crumbled, tears welled in her eyes, and her body shook. "I had no choice," she whispered. "She was never supposed to be born. I thought if I got rid of her, I would finally have peace." A shocked gasp spread through the crowd. Mirembe clutched Ammani tighter, her eyes filling with tears. Chief Barassa's face hardened. "You stole an innocent child from her mother," he said, his voice laced with disgust. "And you lied to me for all these years. You let Mirembe suffer while you sat by her side, pretending to comfort her." Adisa dropped to her knees. "Please, my chief," she begged. "Forgive me. I was blinded by my pain. There is no excuse for what you have done," an elder interrupted. "This crime is unforgivable." Chief Barassa turned to the elders. "What punishment does she deserve?" The oldest elder spoke. "She does not deserve a place among us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The verdict was clear. Adisa had spent her life ensuring her position in the village, but now, that power was stripped away. "Adisa," Chief Barassa said, his voice cold, "from this moment on, you are banished from Zubari. You will leave now, and you may never return." Adisa's eyes widened with horror. "No, please, not that," she cried. But there was no mercy in Chief Barassa's eyes. The villagers stepped back, turning their backs on her one by one. The same people who once feared and respected her now looked at her with disgust. With nothing left, Adisa stumbled to her feet, her once proud posture broken. She took one last look at the village she had ruled over and at the daughter she had tried to erase. Then, with tears streaming down her face, she walked away, disappearing into the wilderness. No one followed. No one called her back. Adisa, who had once lived in luxury and power, was now nothing more than an outcast, left to beg for survival. The village of Zubari rejoiced as the truth was finally revealed. Ammani, the child once thrown away, had returned home. The villagers, who had once whispered about Mirembe's misfortune, now looked at her with admiration. She had endured years of sorrow, but fate had brought her daughter back. Ammani, standing beside her mother, felt overwhelmed. For years she had dreamed of finding her true family, but she had never imagined such a moment. She looked at Mirembe, who wiped away happy tears, and at Chief Barassa, who gazed at her with pride. "My daughter," Barassa said, his voice filled with emotion, "I have wronged you without knowing it, but now I will make things right." Ammani smiled softly. She had suffered, but she was not bitter. Instead of anger, she felt peace. Baba Tembo had always taught her that kindness was the greatest strength. She had seen how hatred had destroyed Adisa, and she did not want to walk the same path. "I hold no hatred in my heart," Ammani said, her voice steady. "What is lost can never be changed, but we can choose how we move forward. I only wish to live in peace." The elders nodded approvingly. The villagers cheered, grateful that Ammani had chosen forgiveness over revenge. She had been raised by a wise man, and it showed in her actions. Chief Barassa, moved by his daughter's wisdom, made a decision that would change the future of Zubari. "Ammani has proven herself to be strong, not through war or power, but through kindness and wisdom," he declared. "From this day forward, she will be my heir." Gasps of surprise spread through the crowd. A woman as an heir? It was unheard of, but no one dared to question the chief. They had seen Ammani's strength, and they knew she was worthy. Mirembe beamed with pride, holding Ammani's hands tightly. After all the suffering, her daughter was not only back in her arms, but was now one of the most powerful women in the land. Ammani had been thrown into a river as a helpless newborn, left to die. But fate had other plans. She had risen above cruelty and pain, proving that true strength was not in revenge, but in love, wisdom, and forgiveness. And word of Ammani's return spread beyond Zubari, reaching distant villages and lands. Travelers spoke of the lost princess who had been thrown into a river as a newborn, but survived by the will of fate. They told of how she had grown into a wise and kind woman, how she had forgiven those who wronged her, and how she had become the heir to the great Chief Barassa. Her story became a lesson that parents told their children, a reminder that no evil deed goes unpunished, and that destiny cannot be stopped. Meanwhile, Adisa walked the land alone, stripped of her title, her home, and the respect she once commanded. She had thought that power and control would make her happy, but in the end, they had left her with nothing. She wandered from village to village, begging for food, but few were willing to help a woman with no family or purpose. At night, she sat under the cold sky, haunted by the cries of the baby she had thrown into the river so many years ago. No matter how far she walked, she could never escape the weight of her sins. Back in Zubari, Ammani embraced her new life, not as a princess who sought revenge, but as a leader who wished to bring peace. She ruled with fairness, always remembering the lessons Baba Tembo had taught her. She honored her mother, Mirembe, and cared for the people of Zubari, ensuring that no child was ever cast aside the way she had been. Though she had once been abandoned to the mercy of the river, fate had carried her to where she truly belonged. She had not only survived, but had risen above hatred and cruelty. In the end, her story proved what the elders had always said: destiny may be delayed, but it can never be denied.